An art history professor of mine was putting together a show for Eastern Michigan University, which is where I graduated, of comic book artwork. And he wanted there to be something that people would take with them when they left besides just a program for the show. And he thought, I'll get local artists to do a comic. Just maybe give them each 4 pages to do whatever they want. They get a little 4-page story. We'll put it together as an anthology. So I had done those 4 pages for him, and he used an online print-on-demand service called Comics Press. And I was involved a little bit in the pre-press of that book and making sure that it got sent off and how it got sent off and how to get the files digitally the way they needed to be. So when it was time to do Mouse Guard, I thought, well, I know that I like the quality of their book, and I know that from the pre-press end, it was really easy. It's all stuff I can handle. Pre-press can get a little daunting if it's more complex, so I went through Comics Press. I had them publish the first issue as a black and white interior with a color cover book, and I took it to my first show, and it did pretty well. It's the kind of thing where you order a certain amount at the beginning, and then they sell it on their site. I sold out of pretty much everything that I ordered personally, which was about 100 issues. And so for a local convention, that's really good. The beginnings of Mouse Guard really go back to some stuff I was doing in high school, where a friend of mine was doing a comic that was set in modern day. Another friend was doing one that was set as like a sci-fi adventure. And I thought, I should do one that's set in the past, like a medieval adventure, a fantasy thing. And it was a little more like Disney's Robin Hood. There was a fox and there was a bear. There were also goats and a tiger and weasels, and it was a crazy mishmash of animals. And that's where Mouse Guard really kind of started. And it wasn't until I was getting out of high school and into college, I wanted to reinvestigate those characters, that world, but to set it up more realistically, where the bear would try to eat the fox, and the fox would try to eat the weasel, and the weasel would try to eat the mice. Like, let's make this as realistic as possible. Let's make these actual animals, not humans with animal heads. And it was in that I thought, what's going to be the smallest thing I'll create? And the mice, I figured, were about as small as I wanted to go. And then the problem was, how do I keep them alive? Like, if they're main characters in a story, how do they survive in this kind of a climate? How do they interact with the other characters? And I came up with the idea of the Mouse Guard, where the mice are hidden in hidden cities and bases, and then they can travel in between by having the Mouse Guard escort them. And then the rest of the story just felt useless. Like, all the other characters seemed like added fluff or just overly complex, and at the core of the story really was what these mice were doing. And so I sat down to draw some mice. I was a fan of an illustrator named Tom Port at the time, and he had just done a book that had Native American legend and folklore in it, and there were some mice in one of those stories. So I was looking at how he drew mice to kind of get the feel for mine. And I immediately drew 3 mice, Saxon, Kenzie, and Rand. And I had a baby names book that I kept handy for looking up the meanings of names. And I was kind of flipping through, and I saw Saxon means sword. And I was like, okay, I'll have one guy that's really good at, he's really aggressive. He's the sword fighter. He's the offensive guy. And Kenzie meant wise. And I thought, okay, he's the strategist. He's more the sage, the one who keeps them in check. And then Rand means shield, or shield bearer. And okay, he's our defense guy. So it was like right there I had 3 of the main characters of who would make up this thing. And then for I don't know, about 9 years, they and their stories and more characters just kind of rattled around in my head, coming up with new stuff all the time and jotting down things here and there, thinking maybe this will be a children's book, maybe this will be a comic, maybe I'll try to write a screenplay for something, not knowing how I wanted to investigate it. And I went to a local convention just with samples of my work to display, and I had some samples of Mouse Guard drawings. And people started asking, when's this book coming out? When's this comic coming out? And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess it'll be ready for the next convention. How's that? And then there it was. I had my deadline set, and I had to figure out where in this huge, this huge history of Mouse Guard that I'd come up with, where do I start? Where's the good intro point? And how much of the story do I try to tell in one arc? Comics Press that I had print the black and white copies of Mouse Guard offered custom sizes with no additional charge, and they gave some size parameters for their maximum in each direction. And 8 was their maximum, so I just said, okay, it's going to be an 8-inch square book. I like that. It's interesting that way. It's different. Later, somebody pointed out that it's like a children's book, and I went, oh, actually, you're right, it is. I hadn't even thought about that. Even being a guy who wanted to do children's books, that part hadn't entered my mind. I was doing it because of the panel layout and just because it would be something a little bit different to catch people's eyes. After the near sellout at the Motor City Comic Con with my black and white Mouse Guard issue, I was going to the San Diego convention just as a visitor, just to go experience it. And it was actually going to be my first time. And I knew some people there that I'd met online that I was going to make sure I brought copies for because they were interested in the book. And I bumped into a guy named Bill Baker, who's a comics journalist who lives here in Michigan. And he said, oh, are you trying to pitch your book to other publishers? And I said, no, I'm not. You know, who wants a square book about mice? He said, well, actually, you should go talk to Archaea Studios Press. It's Mark Smiley's company that he did to do his own book, to publish his own book, Artesia. And he said they're looking for fantasy stuff that's different. That's the whole call for submissions is fantasy or supernatural stuff that's different. Well, okay. And I had talked to Mark Smiley before. He'd done a portfolio review with me a couple years before. Made me feel really comfortable. I felt kind of weird. It was the first time I'd ever shown work out in public like that before. So the idea of it's scary. And Mark just made it really easy, made me feel really comfortable, gave me good information. Okay, well, if I'm going to go show this to anybody, I'll show it to Mark. And the worst thing is he'll just be as polite as he was before. And it won't go anywhere. But actually, Mark was really excited about it and said, I want to publish this. Let's do it in color. Motor City was a great way to kind of start going to conventions. The first convention I did happened to be the fall convention. That was where people were asking, when does this Mouse Guard book come out, before I even had a book. And the fall show is always the smaller of the conventions. It's the spring show. They do it twice a year, and the spring show is the bigger one. So I started on the smaller one, so that was a nice, baby step into that world. And then it was nice that when I actually had the black and white to bring to Motor City, it was the spring show, so it was the bigger show where I could have a bigger audience to try to sell it to. So between the spring show and then the next fall show is when I made the deal with Archaea. But issue 1 in color through Archaea wasn't coming out until February. So when I came back in the fall, I didn't really have anything. So I made a sketchbook up of Mouse Guard stuff. So something that was, I still gave them something, and I did apologize because I told everybody, issue 2 will be ready for fall, and then my publishing schedule completely changed by hooking up with Archaea. But it's been great. I've been able to meet some good people like Guy Davis, Nate Pride, Vince Locke. They're all regulars at that show. The buddy of mine who got me to go to the convention in the first place, Jeremy Bastian, does fantastic work, and he's a regular there as well. So now when I go to Motor City, even though I go to these other conventions around, I've been to San Diego and Chicago and Philly, Baltimore, going to Motor City feels like coming home and hanging out with friends, because you know everybody already, and it's more relaxed. Mouse Guard has been an incredible experience. I went into this thinking that I wasn't really a comic book guy, that because of the way I drew and the kind of stories that I wanted to tell, I was going to have to be a children's book guy. But I loved comics. So being included in that world, and not just included, but the book's doing well, so successful in that world is great. And it's a lot of fun to finally be able to tell these stories, to be able to have fun and explore this world, and to have people come to me at conventions and tell me how much they enjoy being in that world as well.